Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Patton. Welcome to Midlife Reinvention. I have a midlife reinvention coach for you, and that's Meredith Richardson, who's joining us today. And you know how it is on the internet. You do a search and you find these interesting people. Well, that's exactly what happened here. I did a search for people who do coaching in midlife, and I came across some Meredith, and it's like, wow. Everything that I envisioned about midlife and coaching, she has it. So I'm really excited about it, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Karen. I have to say, too, your story is such an inspiration to me. The fact that you went back to doing the barefoot water skiing, I was telling people your story this morning, and they were just like, what? How does she even do barefoot water skiing? Let alone to go back to it, right? And be doing it in midlife and beyond. It's a fabulous story. And I love the picture of you doing it backwards. Yeah.
I've been really lucky because my mentor was a 66-year-old woman who is now 80.
Wow.
And I'm now 57. So I got back on the water at 44.
Right.
So definitely a midlife reinvention. That's for sure. So tell me about your journey. How did you get into this path of becoming a midlife coach?
So my journey started with a dark part. So I survived an attempted kidnapping in 2015. That's how I ended up on this path. So that created just a line of demarcation in my life. So there was my life before the attempted kidnapping and after the attempted kidnapping. And so before the attempted kidnapping, I was a mediator and I was in the middle of people's conflict all the time. And I was a rescuer. Like I had a big time superhero complex, and I would be running toward danger instead of away from it. I was always looking to help people. I was always putting their needs first. I ignored my needs. I pretended I didn't have needs. I only took care of my needs last, and I never asked for my needs to be met. And I was super proud to be a superhero, and I did not look at the fact that superheroes actually have very dysfunctional lives, right? So if you look at a superhero, they're really good at taking care of everybody but themselves. They are terrible at relationships. They always have to wear a mask. They have to pretend to be two different people, right? So nobody can really know who they are. And they never get help because they can't ask for it. And all of that was true. So, yeah, so I changed, my life changed as a result of that, because all of a sudden I went from being somebody who could take care of everyone else to having really big needs. And I found that some of the people I had around me, they only liked me being a superhero. They were not there to meet my needs. It wasn't a reciprocal relationship, right? It was a relationship where my role was to be the superhero. I had a marriage that failed. So my ex-husband, he was good the first year afterwards, but we both had this vision that I was going to go back to who I was, right? That given enough time, I was going to be able to heal myself and go back to who I was. And the realization came that that person did not exist anymore. And that wasn't the woman that he had fallen in love with. He did not fall in love with me now. He fell in love with me then, right? So our marriage fell apart. I was re-triggered when I had to face off against my attacker at his criminal trial in 2018. And I had never been able to reset my body to safety living in Maine. So I had been attacked in Maine. I had lived there. And I just was never able to get myself to feel fully safe, and I wanted to move. So in 2018, I left everything behind. I left my career, I left my marriage, I left the country, and I went to the one place on earth that I felt safe. And that was this little tiny village in Norway. My great grandfather came from Norway, And I had reestablished the ties with my family in 1990. And I had actually gone and farmed on the family farm for 2 summers when I was in my early 20s. And so when I went to Norway, to this little village, I went for a visit a couple of weeks after the trial, and I felt like I came home. And I felt like I came home to me before the attempted kidnapping.
It's safe.
So,
It's safe place.
yes, yes. And it was also, I just think there was a part in my genetic DNA that was like, this is where you're meant to be. But also the family there is a very loving, kind, supportive family. And so I knew I needed that like safe community that would be loving and kind. And I went there. And so from there, I wrote a memoir when I was there, and I wandered the world. And I thought that I was going to be able to be a writer and just hide out and write books. That was the first thing that I thought I would do. But I wasn't able to get people to buy. I wasn't able to get an agent to take the memoir and run with it. And I wasn't going to do self-publishing because that was going to look, I would have to be too visible. So I thought, all right, well, what else can I do? So I had been a really good mediator in the middle of people's conflict. I've always been someone who was strengths-based and solution-focused, right? And I could help people to see the best in themselves, even when they were at their worst. And I could help them to be those best selves. So I thought, okay, I can do some coaching. And I reached out to Facebook friends and said, what would you want to learn from me? And I thought it was going to be about relationships because of all the work I had done as a mediator. And instead, they're looking at me doing international pet sitting and wandering the world. And they're like, we want to know how to do what you did. Like, how did you go from where you were to, now you just wander the world? How do you do that? And so I thought, okay, well, yeah, I mean, international pet sitter. I'm also, international homeless person. It just depends on how I'm feeling about it, which day you ask me, right? But
You can make
sure,
money off of it. Hey,
yeah,
well,
I can help you. And so that's the
people will
story.
tell you what they want, or they'll tell you what your gifts are.
Right,
It's a great thing to ask people, what are some ways that I can help you? What do you see? What's the path? And they
right,
tell you.
right. And it was very empowering for me because at the time I was still finding my path, right? I was trying things that weren't necessarily working, but there are so many people who are afraid to try that when they see someone that's just going for it, right? They want to know, what is that special sauce that makes you just go for it? And,
What is this
when
special sauce?
well, I could ask you the same thing, right? I mean, you go and you start doing the barefoot. Yeah, I think that there is this, the special sauce can be just this, I'm going to do this. And for me, what it was I knew none of what I had was working. And I didn't know how I was going to make it work. But I knew that I needed to do something completely different. And I believed that if I could go to a place where I felt safe and I had the good community in addition, but if I could just get myself reset to safe, I could figure everything else out. Because with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first thing you need is safety, right? And so I was always
You
butting
have
up
to have
against.
that bottom first before you can
Yes,
explore at the top. If you don't feel
right.
safe, you don't have money coming in, if you are hungry and don't have a home, it's very hard to answer the question, what's your passion?
Exactly. If you don't feel safe, you're not thinking about your passion at all. What you're thinking about is, I need to be safe, right? And then maybe I can talk about what a passion is, but first I have to feel safe. And so it was that restructuring and reprogramming. But I also think, so there's part of it, there's like courage is going and doing something, right? even though it could go wrong, right? Even though you have some fear it could go wrong. And stupidity is also doing the same thing. So there was a little bit of naivete, or a lot of it, because I left and I was like, I'm going to give myself 90 days to figure it out. And I'm not going to have anything else to do. So I'm going to have plenty of time to think. So that's plenty of time to figure things out, which was not at all true. But it did get me started on the journey. And so what I would end up doing, I lived my life in 90-day increments. I had to worry about international treaties. So I couldn't live places for more than 90 days. If I was living on the continental Europe or Western Europe, I couldn't be there for more than 90 days as an American. I could have been down in Australia, I think, for longer. I was down there, but I went down there during the summer and I like cooler times better. I could be in the United Kingdom for 6 months. So I would be scheduling things. I would be figuring out, what am I going to do? Where am I going to live? Okay, I've got my living set up for the next 90 days. Good. Okay. Let's go from here.
Were you ever like anxious or scared or worried about what the next 90 would bring?
Sure. Yes.
And
yes to all of that.
How did you deal with that fear, that anxiety, the unknown? How did you deal with it?
So honestly, the fear for me was much worse living in the area where I had been attacked. So I had already had to deal with feeling fearful a lot in order to stay where I was and continue to do my job. So I had been living with fear for a couple of years, and I had been retraining my brain. So let me take a step even further back, right? So after the attack, the first thing I did for 24 hours was I did nothing. I basically hid out in bed. And my husband, my former husband, he was like, that's not the healthiest thing. So the next day, I used to be the one to walk the dog. He took me out with the dog. So he's holding my hand. I've got my arm around him. We're just going to walk and see how far I can make it before I need to turn around. The length of 1 block, that's it. It was like, okay, that I can't do anymore. So we turned around. So the next day, I went with the dog without him, that same block, and he had sort of cleared that air, right? It was how I saw it for my brain. So I was like, okay, that is safe. And then the next day, I did that plus a little more. So I just used those same principles with everything. So I had been somebody before this who loved to travel. I had been somebody before this who had studied French in France and studied Russian in Russia, right? Who had farmed on the family farm in Norway. Like, travel was such a big part of me. And after this, I was afraid to be outside as soon as the sun was setting. I wanted to be at home. I wanted my then husband home with me. All of that changed. And so I just used the same techniques to train my brain to be able to do things again. So by the time I left, right, I had to, 2 years after the attack, I trained myself. Like, I went and I stayed overnight for the first time in a hotel. And I did it about an hour and a half from my house. I was there for a 2-day training. And I thought, worst case scenario, I can drive back if I'm too scared. But so I made it close enough and yet far enough, right? So I stayed.
Little baby steps that you
It was little baby steps, right?
A little bit further, and a little bit further.
Yes.
So let me ask you this: when you think of the word passion, what does it mean to you, and how do you define it?
So when I think of the word passion, I actually put it always in the sex category. So it's amazing to me that it's not in the sex category.
Many people do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are things I think before the attempted kidnapping, it wouldn't have simply been in that category. I had to learn how to be excited without having it become an overstimulating thing, because I was always in that fear response that even good excitement could trigger me into that space. So, for example, I couldn't listen to music for years. Like, I loved music, I sang in a choir, but I couldn't do it after the attempted kidnapping because just listening to it would make my whole body like vibrate on a higher frequency. So I was always searching for the calm and not for the passion. And it's only in the last year, I would say, that I'm actively starting to look for not just things that will bring me peace, right? Because there's a lot that you can do that will bring you peace and joy and happiness in that calm state, versus things that you're passionate about that bring you that energized wow factor.
Yes, absolutely. I love, I've done like over 200 interviews on this topic, and I got 200 different definitions. It just amazes me every single time that people find different ways to convey the concept of passion. So now let's talk about hypnotherapy, because that's part of your coaching, that you, a tool that you use. Can you tell me about the journey with that?
Sure. So in 2019, when I was starting my online coaching business and I was living over in the United Kingdom, I was having trouble with the marketing piece because, as you know, right, as somebody who's, if you're self-employed, at some point you have to learn how to market yourself, right? So I was having trouble being visible. I really thought it had to do with the attempted kidnapping, but I also was really mad at my mother, and I wasn't sure why. My mother was being the same mother my mother's always been. And so I worked with this woman who was a coach and hypnotherapist. And so hypnotherapy, the type of hypnotherapy I do is the same type that she did for me. And it's called heart healing. And what it does is it takes you to meet a younger version of yourself. So we don't go back and do, you don't have to relive the traumatic event. You're not going back in time to do that, but you are going back to a younger version of you to meet a younger version of you and see what happened. And so for me, I had learned when I was younger how to be a really good backup singer, because my mom needed to have the center stage. And so I was afraid to market because it was that younger version of me, right?
Stay in the
That was just like,
background. Stay in the background.
yes, just be a really good backup singer, just be a really good supporting actress. Don't take the stage. Taking the stage is dangerous, right? And so healing,
when you have your own business, you have to take the stage.
you do. And that was the challenge. And so healing that, though, changed everything. Healing that made it was like a domino effect where all the other dominoes fell. And that made it then easier to market. So it wasn't about the attempted kidnapping. The attempted kidnapping was just the last domino, right? There were all these other dominoes too. But if you have a different story about what happened and how to interact with the world, then you act differently.
The story.
So that's the hypnotherapy piece. So it is, we all have stories we tell ourselves, right? And so you can change the story. So instead of having a story where the lesson from that is that you're unsafe, right? The story could be instead that that's what she needed, but that doesn't make you unsafe, right? That there's still this big, beautiful world, and there are so many people who want to hear what you have to say, and that you can help, and that they're going to support what you have to say. And so you have to say it in order for them to hear it, that the only way that you can help them is if you are speaking, right? So that's part of the hypnotherapy. So the first part is doing the healing of what happened. And then the second part, I work with my clients and work with me, right, to find out what is it that you want to believe instead. So if you didn't have this fear anymore of public speaking, how would your life be different? If you didn't have this fear anymore of marketing, how would your life be different, right? If you believed that people actually want to hear what you have to say, if you believed that people actually want to buy what you have to offer, how would you be acting differently in the world?
It's so
And it changes everything.
changes everything. Yeah, the stories we tell ourselves become the stories of our life.
Yes. Yeah, I just was going through this in terms of the church I'm a part of right now. They're looking at a new minister. Our minister's retiring, and they had had a bad experience with the previous minister that had come in. And so they were just like, oh, we can't go looking for a new minister because they'll just be bad, and then it'll feel bad and everything's going to feel bad. So we're just going to do it all ourselves, and we're going to do it without a minister. And it was such a limiting belief. It was just like, okay, so if you want a church to shrink, it is a great idea to have no minister. But if you want to grow a church,
I can't
you
imagine
need
the
to
church
have a
without
minister.
minister.
It's
No,
just the limiting beliefs, right?
let me ask you this question. So if somebody came to you and is smack dab in the middle of midlife and feeling stuck and feeling like the best years of life are behind them, and maybe limiting beliefs about money as well, but he has this desire for a change, but doesn't know where to start, what would you tell them?
I would say the first place to start is to find your joy and to do things that bring you joy every single day. Because what I find is that people can be so disconnected from that when I even say that, like, what do you mean something that brings me joy? And I will have already asked and found out that there are things that bring them joy, but they're so out of tune with it that when I give that for homework, they're just like, oh, that sounds really hard. Nope, it already exists. You've already told me where it is, right? So you have to reconnect with yourself. What I find is that men and women do it. It hits in different ways, right? But a lot of us, we spent a lot of time being what other people wanted us to be and needed us to be. So maybe it was our parents, maybe it was society, maybe it was our kids, maybe it was our spouse, maybe it was everything. But we were the good girls and the good boys, and we did what we were supposed to, and we didn't actually listen to ourselves, right? And we got caught being those square pegs in the round hole. And so midlife, you see people, some people will make a dramatic course correction at midlife, and other people around them will freak out and they call it a midlife crisis. And I really believe it's a calling. It's that they haven't been true to themselves for years, and this is their time to shift, right? That at
It's an
midlife,
awakening.
yes.
That's what I really think it is. It's an awakening and awareness of, oh, wait a minute. First of all, time's running out.
Right.
Time's a little more precious right now. I'm not going to waste time being somebody else.
Right.
So there's a lot of those factors that come in with that, awakening of midlife. So wrapping this up, I got another question for you. When you look back in your past, your Twitter, your whole journey, is there a life lesson that kind of like sticks out for you?
So for me, the life lesson is change your story, change your life. That so much is dependent on the stories we tell ourselves. I see people who are absolutely miserable and they have lives that other people would kill for, right? I also see people who have really hard lives and they're happy. All of it has to do with what we're telling ourselves, right? If you practice gratitude, if you see what you have and what you're blessed with every single day, and if you prioritize joy and self-care every single day, you will be a much happier person. It's really simple, but we make it really hard.
That is beautiful. Change your story, change your life. I love that. What a beautiful way to wrap this up. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for your time here. It was just so much fun just hearing your journey.
Thank you so much too. I really appreciate it. And I'm still saying you are an inspiration to me.
That's awesome. And if you want anyone who wants to connect with them, Meredith, the link is down below. Reach out and connect. Thank you.
Thank you.